Thank you for joining us today, Professor Rose. It's an honor and pleasure to have you here again. And also a big thank you to the community, where over 26% of Jindabyne residents voted for the Rose Group in the last election. So a big thank you and a shout out to all our supporters out there. Now, for those that don't know, Councillor Rose brings a broad background in leadership. He was a former dean at the University of Sydney, a general manager at Meat Livestock Australia, and a lead chair at the Executive Connection for Australia. And so today we'll go through some of the complex challenges facing our region.
Well, Chris, it's really good of you to ask me for an interview. Of course, Chris was on my team, our team of 6 that ran for council back last August, September, and it was a great team. Then Chris decided, having just missed out on becoming a councillor by good fortune, he decided to become an investigative journalist, and he's become an extraordinary investigative journalist in terms of the stories you've broken. He's sort of like the Woodward and Bernstein, which are who are the famous journalists that broke the story about the Watergate tapes. You're like the Woodward and Bernstein of the Snowy Monaro region. So it's great to be talking to you today.
Oh, thank you, Professor. I think Cooma has its range of Watergate issues, like the Cooma water tank gate and perhaps even the Mikalego gate issue. So how has the transition been for you, coming from major leadership roles like being the dean at the University of Sydney and a director at the Meat Livestock Australia, into the world of local government? What have been the biggest challenges you've encountered as a councillor?
Well, it is interesting, this story of local government, which I had not much experience or knowledge. In fact, I think that puts me into the story of most of the local residents. Most people know very little, but I'll just give you a little bit of background. Of course, the most recent job I've had was working for my mother on the farm, and that was one of the hardest jobs I've had, but this council job is harder still. So it's been an interesting story for me because, as you say, I've come from a range of leadership roles. I was not only visiting professor in the United States at several universities and a senior scientist in the UK for research and development. I've also run a range of organisations focusing on R&D here in Australia, horse and meat and livestock areas. And when I took over Dean of the vet school, it was in a financial crisis. I suppose the most important training I've had, apart from training by my mother, to toe the line and run the farm, was that I chaired a group of CEOs running billion-dollar organisations, and in that role I had to do some important jobs in looking at leadership and strategy and dealing with the day-to-day issues across a range of very complicated organisations, from large printers to media groups to groups like dairy, the dairy group, and it was a very good training ground, I think, for me to actually understand leadership and strategy and development and what needed to be done in organisations. And I suppose out of that, if there was one single thing, is the fact that John C. Maxwell is a great leadership writer. He said everything rises and falls on leadership. And so as I look at the issues facing any organisation, the issues around leadership are really important. And Maxwell further says an important law that he has is the law of the lid. That is, you can't lead to a level above that which you already know. So it's the thing that derails most leaders, is that they haven't got the skills and capability to lead the group that they're part of because it's the law of the lid. They have a certain capability, but you can't rise above the capability that you already have. And so I think as I look at any organisation, I look at leadership, and you can see that leadership is important even as we approach the current elections. It's interesting that all the focus has been on Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton. We don't see much focus on the other people. This is because everything rises and falls on leadership.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the key issue here. And in terms of just the council itself, I think that the challenges as council really are just the fact that council as an organisation is really an opaque and unresponsive system. It's not designed to be transparent because it's designed for people to protect the organisation as far as I can see. And that's not surprising. I think that in terms of the way the whole Local Government Act has been written, that's part of the problem we have. So, as you know, one of my favourite sayings is bad systems will beat good people 100% of the time. And one of the things that I've realised is that we've got a bad system, and so we've got good people. In fact, I've been impressed with most of the people working for the Snowy Monaro Regional Council. They're working hard, they're trying to do their best. But if you have a bad system behind you, a system focused on bureaucracy and not getting anything done and overlain by so many challenges because the Local Government Act is also there to try and keep us on the right track. But it's got 700 sections to the Act. No one could possibly understand it. Then Council itself has another 70 odd policies, each of about 10 pages. So it's a system almost, strangely enough, designed for failure.
So if I understand correctly, some of the biggest challenges would be weak leadership and bad systems. Is that right?
I think the system itself probably doesn't tend to throw up strong leadership. I think that's part of the problem. And, you know, you can see that even in the opening meeting that we had where you were present, where I'd suggested, I thought quite reasonably, that people that wanted to be mayor should put forward what their qualities were, why they thought they could meet the criteria. And the Local Government Act has a range of criteria. That was voted down immediately. And the story was, let's just get on with this. And, you know, it would have been very reasonable to see, well, how do the various candidates present themselves and how do they fulfill the criteria? So right from the start, I could see there was a problem because there was no desire to actually put forward what people's qualities were, why they thought they should be mayor, and how they could provide the leadership. So that's one of the key things I think that's just a failure point in the way that we go about this system. It was just about getting the numbers, and then if you got the numbers, which is in our case because there's 11 councillors, there's only 6, you can then push ahead and do whatever you want if you've got 5 other people that can join you.
So it seems. And how would you assess the operational effectiveness of the SMRC?
Well, it is a big problem. I think, as I've been able to sort of work out in the last 7 months since I've started, I think it's a system that's quite challenging because if you look at the 700 sections of the Local Government Act, if you look at all the policies and procedures, you can see that actually failure is assured. The more things you have, the more policies you have, the more things you need to meet. There's a community strategic plan, there's an operational plan, there's a delivery plan, there's all these plans. It's hard to even get your head around them. You know, for the meeting on Thursday, I think we've got 300 or 400 pages of material around the various plans. And I don't think anyone can get their head around it. So I think the government has put more and more things in place to try and make the system accountable But what they've done is to actually create more problems, because it means that people are reluctant to do anything. It seems to me in council, it's a danger to do anything, but it's not a danger to do nothing. So I think that's a system created by a bureaucracy that actually looks at, systems and processes and procedures, and there's so many things that happen there. And I suppose if I look at the Local Government Act and the 709 sections and all the details, they are a stumbling block to actually getting something done. It's very hard. People are concerned they might make a mistake or step out of line or do something. And, as I was talking to a range of teachers recently, I realised it's the same thing. Government has tried to put more and more requirements on teachers to show that they're doing the right thing and demonstrate they're doing this and demonstrating doing that. And so they're filling in more and more forms, but there's less and less time for teaching because there's more and more forms to complete. So I think there's a problem just in the way the whole system is designed. And then, of course, we've got the core issue, which we identified during the election campaign, and that is an amalgamated council is certain to fail, because rather than, and all the warning signs are there in the original report by KPMG. There's a lot of warnings given, but that amalgamated council has just created a bigger bureaucracy, and it's leading to a situation where it's much harder to get something done, and there's more systems and processes and procedures and things to do. So I think we've got a system that's really bad. It will continue to fail, and there's no doubt that in government bureaucracies, the bigger things get, the worse they get, because you actually have a procedure, a core issue that keeps on failing. And, it's not the fault of many of the excellent people that are there. It's a systems failure. And, government has got a history. All areas of government have got a history of doing this. I just take, for one example, Snowy 2, which is very significant for our area. Now, amazingly enough, and I've confirmed this with some key people, this is a decision that was made by the CEO of Snowy Hydro, putting a proposal to Malcolm Turnbull in the Alpine Hotel in Cooma with a diagram on the back of a beer coaster. Now, that was the key document. And I sort of like that in a way, here's a beer coaster, here's a diagram, let's go ahead and do it. But Turnbull at the time said it was going to cost $2 billion and no taxpayer funds. Now it turns out it's going to cost more than $12 billion. And that amounts to, if you start working out, there's only about 12 million taxpayers in Australia. That's about $1,000 for every taxpayer. Now, if you ask every taxpayer, do you want to spend $1,000 on Snowy 2? Of course, they'd say no. But we've got a central problem, because government organisations, it isn't their money. So all government organisations are prepared to spend that money. I suppose many of them try to spend it well, but my observation is over many organisations, many government groups around the world, that because it's not people's own money, they tend to spend it with less efficiency and less concern than it would be if their own money. I remember Kerry Packer saying 50 years ago in an interview, when they were saying, well, why don't you pay more tax, Mr. Packer? And he said, well, why would I? They're just going to waste it. So that's part of the problem. So I think we've got a lot of good people trying to do good things in the council, but we've got this very laborious system, plans upon plans upon plans, 700 sections of an act, 60 or 70 policies and procedures, the story. It makes your eyes glaze over. And so it's very hard to get to the core things. And, what I found in every organisation I've worked for is you need to have 4 or 5 key strategic areas that you work on. It's very clear to everyone what they are. You have some clear goals. You actually work out how to meet the goals, and then you go about delivering on them. And that's not possible in our system as far as I can see.
So from my understanding, you would identify the core problems that the residents and ratepayers experiencing in this region would be primarily systems and processes. that these are keeping this region inefficient?
I think it's not only this region, it's all regions. So I think it would be a miracle for any organisation, any local government to beat the system. You probably can if you've got because everything rises and falls on leadership, if you've got a focused CEO and some excellent staff. But I think it's very, very hard for people to beat the system. Now, if you look at our own data of the feedback from the resident and ratepayers surveys for the past 4 years, one of the big things is consistency. We've been consistently bad. The council over 4 years has shown the same things. And in fact, our results are getting worse. That the results from the residents and ratepayers are saying, no, we're very dissatisfied with the way the council is meeting the needs that we have. And I've been trying to get the council focused on, in fact, I got a motion passed that the council staff look at the most recent survey and work out how to deliver on the concerns with a strategy to deliver that. Now, that hasn't been done, even though that's been 4 or 5 months ago. So I think it's very hard to get to the core of some of these issues. But, one of the interesting things is that our themes were sort of roads, rates and rubbish when we were running for council. And you can see that the issue of roads is still one of the most significant things for ratepayers. People want to see roads fixed. People want to have better roads. Now, we've got one of the problems is that we've only got 22,000 people in the region, and we've got this enormous area. And it means that you have to drive hundreds of kilometres for a crew from, say, the ACT border to go down almost to the Victorian border. So we've got an inbuilt problem, and you need to have maximum efficiency in the way that those things are run. We're just about to get a new engineer in charge of all this, and I'm hopeful that that might put some discipline around that and some better processes. But it is an enormous challenge because there isn't enough money to put that forward. So that's why I asked Christy McBain the other night at the Meet the Candidates survey and Meet the Candidates get together in Jindabyne. I asked her a question saying, is there a system-based approach to actually increasing the amount of money for rural and regional councils that have such an extensive area to try and deal with roads, to get more money and support from the federal government? Because I think we can't do it out of ratepayers' funds. We have to get support from state and federal government to be able to do those basics. And those areas of the roads are one of the most important things for ratepayers. It's completely clear from all the surveys. The other area really that's very clear from the surveys repeatedly is the fact that ratepayers and residents don't feel as though they are getting good response from council. There's not good customer service. Often people have to make 4 or 5 or 6 contacts to council to get something resolved. And that's something that just has to be fixed. And I know it is something that the council staff are focusing on, but it's going to be hard to do that. I think it's going to be hard to get a turnaround in that approach because, we've got all these different little offices, and because we've got now a central bureaucracy rather than, an office in Berriedale or an office in Jindabyne or office in Bombala or an office in Cooma, we've got to try and work out how to do all that, how to keep a central core, but fan out and get the issues taken care of by regional groups. And that particularly must be the case when it comes to work groups. We've got 50, 60, 70 million dollars worth of equipment out there has to be put around to deal with various roads, the priorities, and it's a very complex story. I don't say it isn't. So it needs, but a bigger system is sure to fail, strangely enough, than if we had a smaller system. And when I was talking to Bob Stewart just before the election results were announced, Bob pointed out that the Bombala Council was over $10 million in the black. They'd husbanded their resources very carefully. They'd made key decisions. And that was a council that had been in the red through the 90s when they'd made some bad decisions. But there was an agreement by the local people to do things in a better way. They saved money, they put money aside, and they did an excellent job. And of course, once that was taken over by the broader group, that $10 million has disappeared, who knows where. But I think it's one of the problems. And so, I'm a big fan of de-amalgamation because I can see the central core issue is that we've got a system problem. And in fact, the Wallara Council, one of the smallest councils in Sydney, recognised this and fought back against it and stopped the state government in the High Court. That brought the whole amalgamation issue to a conclusion, but it was too late for us by then because we'd actually already put our head in the noose. So what we've got now, it's very hard to unpick this system, but I think we're going to keep on having issues as long as we have this large bureaucracy and large system. We've got around 400 people, and one of the things is how do we manage that people, how do we structure it, all those issues, and that's something that's going to have to be picked up by the CEO when we get a new CEO in place.
And it's just my sense that it's not just a financial issue, is it? That even if we did have, let's say, 10 times more money, we may have 10 times more problems as well. For instance, with this Jindabyne tip, we spent more than $1.5 million on strategic planning, and yet we were completely blindsided as a community that the tip was full. And this is, from what I understand, the independents actually asking weeks in advance, saying, is everything okay with the tip? And the word that we got back from the executives were, yes, everything's fine. And then all of a sudden they spring you saying, oh, sorry, by the way, it's completely full.
No, it's been a major problem for us. I mean, that was one of the completely difficult things for Nick Elliott and I. We were sitting in a meeting and it was just an ordinary meeting. We were getting briefed on something. And at the end of the meeting, they came and told us, oh, by the way, the tip's going to be closed. As far as we can say, it will have to be closed by the end of the month. That was just a few weeks out. Now, that turned out to be not quite correct, but I think what turned out to be the fact that the tip had reached its capacity for continuing to deal with waste at that tip, and the waste would have to be taken somewhere else. But this was an issue that had been identified 20 years previously, and somehow we hadn't actually taken that issue, which we knew was coming up. The tip was said to be going to be full at Jindabyne by between 2020 and 2025. I think it was one of the bits of information we had. But then, there was no problem until suddenly there was a crisis. And I think councillors tried to make it look as though it isn't a crisis. No, we've got all this in hand, but it was a real crisis. And the solution is going to be, we don't know what the cost of it's going to be in the long term, because the issues now have to be worked out as to whether we have the tip as a transfer station on the current site where they put the waste, whether it's a different spot on that site or a completely different site still. And there may be up to a $15 million spend to create a transfer facility. Of course, there's no way that we have the money for that. So I think that there's a range of different things like this. There are a range of different projects, replacing the water tank that collapsed, this issue of the transfer station, some of the major roads, including, for instance, the Bobian Road, that really would connect Adaminaby through the back way in a good road to Canberra, which would transform Adaminaby. Those are projects where we need an advocate into the state and federal government systems to be able to work out how to get funds for these major projects that are going to be needed for the area. And I think that's a skill that I don't see existing among the councillors, and certainly with the mayor at the moment. The mayor's doing his very best. He's a very nice guy, but I just don't think he has the background and skills. As a young mayor, he's had no previous experience with large organisations, and I think he's doing his best in the situation. But I think it's a job that I think is beyond him in this situation, and that's not to be critical of him at all. He's had a successful business career, but I think this requires something much more, and to be able to be influential with state and federal politicians and working out how to get money out of that system is our only hope, because we can't possibly get it out of the ratepayers and residents here. There's only 22,000. And I think the solution for a lot of these things people think is, oh, we just keep on increasing rates. But it's no solution, because I think we have to work out what are the core services we need and how can we meet those services with our existing capacity, because of course people always want council to do more of this and more of that. But ultimately, council is inefficient. It's the most inefficient way of providing services. So we need to let the market step into some of the areas, and obviously we've got areas where we have to be involved. And then I think if we can get some funds from other sources, then we've got a chance of making ends meet. But the solution is never to actually just keep on increasing rates. Now, of course, rates have to increase with CPI. That's just common sense. But I think at the heart of everything, we need to ask the question, what do we need to maintain the services we have? And I've put a motion up to ask the interim CEO, to ask him, give us a way of maintaining current core services, but yet cutting $5 million out of the budget. Those are the questions we need to ask, because I think we need to have some more spare capacity in the budget, and we just can't keep on putting up rates. That's my view. I think the easy thing is just to keep on increasing rates. There's not enough money to keep on increasing rates. Council can certainly spend the money. There's no problem with that. But that's what we need to stop, is to actually stop excess expenditure, and expenditure only where it's absolutely needed on some of the core services that everyone agrees upon.
I think you're right. I think there is a human cost to being inefficient as well. For instance, just with this failure in the Jindabyne landfill situation, you're going to have so much more traffic going between Jindabyne and Cooma now, just because of this failure of planning. And I think, as one of the councillors put out, there may well very be a human cost to this. Do you think council take into consideration that human element, that people are going to be exhausted, dropping things off at Jindabyne, or being unable to drop things off at Jindabyne, and then having to make a 1-hour trek to Cooma and then a 1-hour trek back, especially as we head into winter?
Look, I'm sure that people are concerned about this. I think, Chris, if you look at the problem and you stand back from it and you say, well, we've known for 20 years. And so this tip's getting more full and no one's saying anything. Yes, it's okay. And then suddenly one day the tip's full. We're going to have to close it. Now it isn't closed. They keep on saying, no, the tip's still operating, which I suppose is true, but it's not operating in the way it was. And the commercial operators have now had to go to Cooma. It's changed the whole, their whole business model and made it very, very difficult for them. So I think, as always, organisations look after themselves rather than look after the people. In fact, it was interesting when we had a discussion very recently, because one of the interesting things that was said by a senior council staff member is that our job is to protect the organisation. Our job is to protect the council. And I was staggered, but I could see that was an important thing. They need to protect the organisation. There are issues there are various complicated legal issues. But in terms of my job and the job of councillors, it's really to look after the ratepayers and residents. And in fact, I've got a quote here somewhere that I've written down. It was from a former Labor shadow minister who said, in relation, this is probably some 5 or 6 years ago, in relation to the latest model code of conduct for the councils, he said, it's increasingly becoming clear that local councillors are being viewed in the same way as members of corporate boards, which I suppose is the model that most people say. Then he goes on to say, and I agree with him, he says, the difference, of course, is that councillors are elected by local constituents and have mandates to pursue often conflicting agendas. Of course, they have corporate responsibilities, but their first responsibility in a democracy is to the people who elected them and not to a majority on a council or corporation. So I take his words very seriously. I think he's 100% correct, that my responsibility is to the people who elected me and not to protect the organisation. In fact, the Local Government Act makes that clear. Section 223 of the Act requires that councillors ensure that the council acts honestly, efficiently and appropriately. And Section 232 of the Act, amongst other things, says that a councillor is accountable to the local community for the performance of the council. So we, individual councillors, are accountable for the performance of the council. And so it's not a matter of protecting the council, it's a matter of the councillors keeping, as Don Chips said, with the Democrats, for the older listeners of this podcast, he said he wanted to keep the bastards honest. And I suppose that's what I see is the role, my role, is to keep the bastards honest, to keep them, the council staff and the processes honest, to see that they deliver value for residents and ratepayers. And you have to remember that the system is actually against it. The whole system I explained, with the 700 plus regulations, the 70 odd procedures and processes and policies, and the whole story is actually designed not to deliver anything, but to deliver a bureaucratic problem. And it takes really good people to break out of that system and get something done. Now, fortunately, we have many of those people in the council, but it's still, the system will eventually beat the people. That's what I think is part of the problem.
Now, you mentioned before in the customer survey, only about 3% of people were very satisfied with the council. Do you think that shows an underlying collapse of trust with this existing council?
Well, it's been over a 4-year period, so it's been consistent. The last survey was completed just after the current council took up their places in the council chamber. I think it was completed in the second half of October in 2024. But one of the things that's interesting about data, real data, is that if it's consistent, and it's consistent over a 4-year period, then it tells you there's a real problem. I don't think that to date, council staff have addressed the issues adequately in terms of looking at the highest priority areas, and there's a lot of information there that tell us exactly what people want to see, but I don't think we've dealt with that. And we need more simplicity in the story. You know, if you look at the material before the council at the meeting on Thursday this week, on the 1st of May, there's just hundreds and hundreds of pages of material. And I don't think anyone could take that, any reasonable person could take it and say, oh, the 5 priorities for the community and the council for this next 12 months and next 5 years is this. So we've got far too complicated a process. And then part of that is being forced on us by the state government. The state government wants these things, these, you know, community strategic plans, and then this next operational plan, and then a delivery plan, and then, you know, plans after plans. And we end up with something that no one can possibly understand. So I think it is a big problem for us to break out of that and actually deliver something that the community values. All the information is there though. So we have the information to know what we need to do. It's just that I think we're not able to do it in the processes and procedures we have at the moment. And of course, it's quite difficult because we've got a split council, because as you've pointed out in your excellent analysis, we've got a situation where 6 of the councillors are routinely voting together against a range of issues, advocating for further transparency or information or financial information or information about insurance, whatever it might be. So that becomes a problem in itself.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because if you followed social media, which I know you don't, you would think that all of these problems are new, that they've only come in since October. But as you pointed out, council satisfaction has been consistently low for the past 4 or 5 years. Is it fair that I suppose this group of councillors, this gang of councillors, put a lot of the council's problems onto one individual at the moment?
Well, I suppose when we look at the whole situation, it's worthwhile just dealing and discussing this, because I knew very little about Andrew Thaler when I came into the council. I'd met him a few times, and I'd heard a lot of negative material about him, but I didn't know much about him at all. And so I realised there's a big backstory, and when I've heard your interview with him, I realised that backstory is significant and has had a big impact on the way that council operates. But Andrew was elected fair and square, and he was one of 11 councillors. Now, the way that the council chose to deal with that in the council management was quite worrying, because I think it must have been a widespread view in council that Andrew himself would be the single greatest threat to the Snowy Monaro region if he entered the council chamber. Now, there may have been many good reasons why people thought that. I can't even understand it, but it was only recently, in the last month or so, that we've uncovered the email sent by David Hogan into local government, into Safe Work, saying that because Andrew Thaler was going to have himself sworn in outside the council offices, this was a threat to the council staff. Now, I don't know how any reasonable person could make that assessment, but that was a view he took. Had security called, he locked down the building, and he wrote in effect to the minister, saying that not only should Andrew not be able to take up his place, but that the whole council shouldn't be allowed to sit in the first place. So, that was a decision taken without authority, because there was no councillors present at that time. We're in the period between two councils. So if you look at that, you realise we started behind the eight ball. There was a view that this council was illegitimate because the then CEO said the whole council shouldn't be allowed to sit. And then he tried to prevent Andrew Thaler from taking up his position. And then, of course, the councillors has been subject to some legal action, and that legal action, with the threat of legal action, council caved in and Andrew was allowed to take up his place. But this has been a costly exercise for no value. And I've thought carefully about the story of Andrew Thaler over the last many months. And I'll say this without knowing any of the background material. Andrew has a real concern and real understanding of issues concerning many people in the region. Many people, because he's high profile, many people approach him with particular issues. And he's got no time for bureaucracy, red tape, or the niceties of the way you deal with people. He's a bloke that goes straight for the jugular. He wants to get something done. He wants to cut through the bureaucracy. And all the issues he's raised in general, most of them, I think, are very reasonable and fair issues. And I find myself in agreement with him about the majority of those issues, because they're issues that come from the community. They're issues that he raised that come to the council. Unfortunately, I don't believe that many of the other councillors deal with it fairly, because it always seems to me as though if Andrew Thaler is for something, then there are a number of councillors that are automatically against it. If he brought up a motion for world peace, you'd find that many of the councillors would be against it. So it is a real issue. Andrew is a change agent, and he's a disruptor, and obviously he causes a range of issues that arise in the way that he does things. But I think most people looking at the council meetings would find him fair, that his arguments are well argued, and in the most place that he's done, I think, a good job of bringing up issues before the public. I think that the issues, as you say, in our surveys go back a lot longer than when Andrew Thaler was a councillor, and we've got a consistent story, and we don't appear to be able to address that issue, probably because of the system issue that I've outlined. But I think I'm hopeful that if we get the right CEO, there can be some redirecting of the story, because I think everything rises and falls on leadership. As I said, we need a good CEO to come in and help direct the council and reorganise the council staff. And I think it does need a reorganisation.
To me, this whole Thaler situation seems a bit hysterical, that there will be so much attention placed on this one individual when there are really big existential issues yet to be dealt with, such as the Cooma water tank issue, such as the aged care issue. You have the Cooma water tank issue where you got 50 homes wiped out, in lots of cars, lots of lives turned upside down. And then you've got the aged care issue. And yet there just seems to be all this focus on this one character.
Yeah, and I suppose there's a backstory that Andrew's outlined, and some of those people on the council, some of those councillors, are involved in that backstory as well. So it's very hard, because I think that the issues to Andrew always seem personal to him. As you say, the issues are much bigger than that. And I think one of the things that we have to do as a council, and haven't been successful, is getting some of those issues. We should all be in agreement about our governance responsibilities. We're required, and we've taken an oath to be responsible for the council, to actually take action to make sure that processes are fair, that there are outcomes for residents. The sections of the Act concern make it very clear what we're meant to do together. And yet some of the things that are quite simple, like some of the issues about the water tank collapse and uncovering some of the payments that have been made, they were voted down. The CEO's resignation at the very start of the council, we were told with great authority by a former mayor, a current mayor, and the acting CEO, that we couldn't see that information. And yet the Act is very clear in itself. It says the resignation must be made to the council. We had authority to see it. And that bit of information was quite important, because it turned out that the CEO's resignation was actually from the beginning of November, and we weren't without a CEO, and we could have made some other decisions about what we put in at the time in terms of an acting CEO and how we went about that. So those sorts of things are really important. Then I tried to move a motion about improvement in the business papers, because, it's clearly ridiculous to try and find, we've got 1,600 pages of business papers. We need a reorganisation so that the core issues are covered in the first 30 or 40 or 50 pages. That was voted down.
And if I understand correctly, you're giving these 1,600 pages and given 48 to 72 hours to review them?
Yes, including the weekend. Mostly they come out on a Thursday or a Friday, and we've got the council meeting the following week. So in the case of one of those, we didn't get the papers until the Tuesday, and the council meeting was on the Thursday. So, but I think just a reorganisation of the papers, even accurate minutes, I thought this is pretty simple. The Act says we must have, the words are, full and accurate minutes. Now, there's no way our minutes are full or accurate. There's a lot of material, but that was voted down. I've brought up the ineffectiveness of weed control and a way of saving money there. I've brought up the issues of possible asbestos contamination of land. There's also this very important issue of unreasonable complainant conduct, a policy of council that hasn't been reviewed, despite the fact that the Ombudsman has put new material in place a couple of years after we last reviewed, and certain individuals have had unreasonable conduct complaint taken against them, so they can't contact staff, they can't contact the council. There's a whole lot of processes and procedures. So
I hope you'll forgive me, because I know you don't want to be political in this, but one of the state ministers was saying that the asbestos issue in this region isn't really an issue. Is that the truth? What's the truth? Is asbestos an issue, or isn't it an issue?
Look, I don't have the knowledge to know, but I know, for instance, that Councillors Thaler and Williamson have brought up significant issues about asbestos contamination. And I don't know if those have been appropriately investigated, but clearly if there's a contamination of land, and one of the issues was clearly down at Mikalago when we had that important motion, and I must give you great credit, because I think without you raising this issue in the local region and putting pressure on the whole system, I doubt that the motions that were passed at that meeting at Bombala would have been passed. So it is important for people to make their voices known, because when they do, and when they're brave enough to come forward, then the issue can be dealt with. The systems in the council, I think, are slow moving and they're not rapid. And that's one of the problems. And I think that's one of the frustrations that Andrew Thaler has, because he, for instance, notified council back in early December about major issues down at Mikalago, and yet nothing was done for some months. And so I think these are really important issues that we need to have on the front of, we need to be on the front foot of. And it means then within the council system, there have to be people that understand if there's something like possible asbestos issues, and it was clear that there must be asbestos following the tank issue, because it was even highlighted by Mr. Bascom, who was the CEO at the time, of the possible contamination with asbestos. Now, it seems that council did nothing to fully investigate that, and yet that issue still exists today. Somehow, council sometimes feels as though it's got its hands tied because they're worried about if they do something, it might reveal something like, Pandora's box. They open it up and there's a lot more problems with it. So sometimes it feels as though it's better not to know. But I think it is a real problem, and how you deal with those problems is really the responsibility of the CEO and how he organises then the staff and prioritises those issues.
I'm a big fan of the emotions, as you know. How could anyone ever vote or not want these things such as transparency or accountability or responsibility, and things such as accurate minutes? It just baffles my mind on how well-meaning people could reject these motions. Don't we all want these things? Don't we all want a transparent local government? Don't we all want more accountability and responsibility?
Of course. In fact, our own council documents, if you look at the ones coming before it, there's a nice little one-pager, and one of the things that on that one-pager is basically transparent and accountable leadership is one of the things that is there. But I think it's easy to say it, but it's hard to do it. And so when it seems to me, when push comes to shove, when you want to know information, and this has been my experience, when I want to find out information, I'm told by the CEO that this is not information they need to have, or it's not business before council. There's a range of ways that it's put. And the way that the Local Government Act has been framed is got an essential problem in it, because the way that it was set up was for basically the CEO to hold all the power and the councillors really to have none. Because when it comes to the Act, everything boils down to the story of in consultation with the General Manager, or the term used in the Act is the General Manager rather than the CEO. They call it the CEO to make it sound a bit better for the person coming in, but they are in fact the General Manager under the Act. And that General Manager has certain specified roles, and one of those roles is to make sure the councillors have information. But it's interesting because ultimately that General Manager can make a decision about what councillors need to have, what need to know, what they don't need to know. And in fact, you'll see that in some of the council papers. One of the responses from the CEO in one of the council papers with several of my motions is, it's not necessary for councillors to know this information. Well, that actually isn't the decision for the General Manager. It's a decision that individual councillors responding to concerns by the community. And I must say, I have not just concerns expressed to me from the local community around Jindabyne, but widely from, as far down as Delegate and certainly in Mikalago and beyond. And so I'm grateful to hear from people and to actually know what the issues are. And then I take those forward. And one of the things I'm proud of doing is putting before the community publicly the issue of the water tank. Now, a lot of people think, well, that's old business and we shouldn't be worried, but it never has had a public hearing. That issue has never been considered by council. It's all been done behind closed doors. And that makes you worried that it actually may be something that we're not meant to know. Now, I don't know what's behind the whole story, but I do know for sure that a tank that was structurally unsound and shown to be so was filled, and it collapsed and caused a lot of problems. And now we, as the local residents, have got not only to deal with that issue, and we don't know where the payments have come from because we can't get behind that because those motions haven't been passed by the council, but we've got an ongoing problem because we've got a tank to replace, and it's been said that we've got that's $2.5 million. Well, it's going to be at least double that, you would imagine. And, it's not right that because of staff decisions that was clearly improper. Now, it may have been under duress and with fires approaching and so forth, but still, it was well known that that tank was unsound. It was filled, it caused a lot of problems, and it seems to me as though people have said, well, just let's move on. But I don't think we can move on, and that's why I wanted to go back and look at it, because, as I said, bad systems will beat good people 100% of the time. We have to understand the systems that led to that. And we've never had a proper public inquiry to see what are the system's failures that led to this decision. We've tried to just sweep it under the carpet and then move on as though nothing has happened. At least it's been placed before the public, and we've had a chance for individuals to speak at a public forum, for motions to be debated, and even if many of the motions were lost and people voted against transparency, at least they were put before the public. And Chris, I see my role. I would like to get some of these motions passed, but I was quite influenced by the great 4th century philosopher Augustine, who said, truth is like a lion. Set it free and it will defend itself. So just putting truth before the public, I think, is important for people to see. It's really good for people to come along to the meetings. They're long and sometimes very boring, but I think it's very important for residents to come to meetings, see what is happening, see for themselves whether the arguments are right or wrong that have been promoted and being dealt with by the various councillors, and then actually provide some feedback about it as well, because I think ultimately, as I said at the time that our group was running for council, if you keep on doing the same thing, you'll get the same results. Now, if you keep on voting the same councillors in that have been there and been responsible for the problem, then you get the same results. Ultimately, whatever time the next council elections are, because of the work you've done in making some of these issues, people need to make better decisions. And we can't just keep voting people back in if they haven't delivered results and even advocated for those things. So I think that's very important for people to understand. The problem is, of course, is that 95% of people really don't care. And I can see that. I can understand why. People have got lives to live and things to do, and the issues of the council are only a small amount. But when we're seeing rates keeping on rising, eventually it'll get our attention, and we'll say, what's happening here? We can't just keep on voting in people who are just going to keep on raising rates and thinking that's a solution to all our problems, because the system itself will waste the money that we give it. It's inevitable. So we have to keep on making the system accountable and not just saying, let's keep on raising the rates. That's my platform, and was on my platform at the time. And many people said, well, you can't say you can't raise rates. I say, yes, but I can advocate for trying to be more efficient in what we're doing rather than just raising rates and raising issues to make things more transparent, which I've tried to do.
I appreciate your emphasis on the Coombe water tank issue as well, in the sense that this was the worst man-made disaster in our region, and there's still so many questions about it. We still don't know the individuals that were involved in approving the filling of the tank. And if you walk down that street, there are still so many people that are still affected by that crisis today. They've had their lawns filled with asbestos, and there's been no remediation whatsoever. And this is 5 years on. And if you didn't have insurance, there are still families out there that haven't been paid out. I think a lot of people think, oh, everyone's being paid out, but that's simply not the case. And if it wasn't for you and the other independents, I think, yeah, these poor families, which a lot of them are in financial need, would just be ignored and swept away. Unintended.
No, I mean, you've done a good job because you've gone and talked to local residents there, and I appreciate what you've done in raising those issues. It's quite a difficult issue because one of the things I've discovered in talking to a range of people is that people have been burned by the council. They've raised issues and then it's been held against them. And so people are reluctant to step forward, even to actually claim what is their just, reward for what's been done to them, or recompense for what's been done to them. So people are concerned about the council. People feel concerned about the situation. I mean, Matt Badrock's quite moving testimony at the Bombala meeting, where somehow he became the target of legal action. And if he hadn't had a relative who was a lawyer, he could have been in all sorts of problems. And I can see why he's feeling quite exposed. So it is difficult for people because people don't want to come forward, don't want to bring things up because it comes against them and they become targets, which is really, really unfortunate. And so I think, we just have to stand up for people who are prepared to speak up and deal with the issues, because, with most of the issues, it's a natural tendency of organisations to cover things up. If you can understand, I just tried to put myself in the shoes of the people that filled the tank that day. I'm sure their intentions must have been good, but once you've actually had a disaster, and even though there was a warning of the disaster with the, water coming from the tank and calls to the police and calls to the council on that Saturday, then nothing was done. And next thing, the tank explodes, could have caused death, certainly caused millions of dollars worth of damage. And of course, the first thing people are going to do is to want to say, it wasn't our fault. That's what I think I'd do in that situation. I'm thinking, my goodness, this is shocking. We've done this thing. What can we do? Oh, well, the fires were coming and we had to fill the tank. But no one asked them to fill the tank. They did it themselves. And then a former mayor was saying, we didn't know it was unsafe. And yet there'd been a report to council in the few weeks before, not like a year beforehand or 2, but just a few weeks beforehand, saying the tank was structurally unsound. So there was all this information that existed. And of course, when it happens, it's just human nature. People are going to want to say, it wasn't my fault. I didn't do it. There's this and this. And I don't think ever there's been any transparency around what happened. And as people have dug in and tried to find out what's happened, they've been pushed back at every stage, including me. But at least we've found out some more information. We haven't found out all the information, because in the very last meeting, the issues around looking at where the finances have come from, that motion was not passed by the council. Again, an issue where a lack of transparency is clear. So I think people are theoretically for transparency, but when it comes down to it, if it's going to uncover something that makes the council look bad, people don't want to do it. And I can understand that to a certain extent, but it's not what we were elected to do. I was elected because people wanted me. We ran on a platform of transparency and accountability, and that's what I'm trying to do.
Council is currently under a performance improvement order. Do you think that this performance improvement order will achieve any real change here? Or is there a deeper cultural change that's needed beyond what's put in the PIO?
It is a big problem, Chris, because I think at the heart of the issue we've got is a wrong concept that was put forward to me by one of the councillors, which was put to her by a previous general manager, and that was, it's just a matter of getting 6 votes. And so that concept is completely wrong, because the issue is not a matter of getting 6 votes. It's a matter of somehow the leader, that is the mayor, bringing the group together to make the best decisions for the community. At the moment, we've got a divide. It's a 6-5 divide. And it appears to me, at least, that often the 6 that are voting against some of the issues of transparency are doing so because they don't want the situation uncovered. They don't want transparency and they don't want accountability. And I think many of them are voting that way because they want to so-called support the council staff. We're not being critical of council staff. We're not being negative about council staff. But there is an accountability that people have to have. And so I think that's one of the issues is this 6-5 divide. A good leader will try and harness the whole team, not and sometimes that means even voting against things that you probably wouldn't vote for. So we've been in a situation where it's been 5-5 and the mayor or the chair could vote the other way for something for more transparency, but they've chosen not to do that. And who knows why they've done that. But that's one of the issues. Then we've got issues like the model code of conduct. And the model code of conduct and then code of conduct complaints or code of conduct infringements are part of the problem. We've got the model code of conduct is a pretty simple document. It's just basically be polite and nice to one another. But, what ends up happening is that for the first organisation, I've worked in organisations all over the world. I've never seen an organisation where people have had code of conduct complaints, and there are dozens of them, and people putting in code of conduct complaints. And the code of conduct complaints don't lead to better conduct, they lead to worse conduct. The performance and improvement order, I don't think will lead to a better outcome, it'll lead to a worse outcome. Because at the heart of everything is a leadership issue where the leader of the council needs to bring the council together in the best interests of the community and to harness the differences that are there amongst the councillors at the moment. And I think it's very hard for that to happen in the current structure. So I think we've got, a lot, if you read through the performance improvement order, all of it is targeted at Andrew Thaler, even though a range of other councillors are mentioned, but never by name. But there were all these complaints, the 19 complaints about this and that and the other thing. And, some of those complaints may be right or wrong, but we've never seen those come into the public view. But I think it's going to be a problem for us because my sense is that the view politically, not only in Labor circles, but also Liberal national circles and others, is the main problem down here is Andrew Thaler. If we get rid of Andrew Thaler, everything will be right. But that won't solve anything because, yes, Andrew's a disruptor, but he is a person that will shine the light on real issues that are of concern to everyone in the community. And he might have a different way of doing it, and he may say some inflammatory things. But I think that's part of the nature of a disruptor, and you have to work out how to deal with that disruptor in a way within the council chamber in a good way. And so far that hasn't been the case. So if they get rid of Andrew Thaler, will it fix all the problems? No, because the problems are still there. As you say, we've got 4 years of data showing deep dissatisfaction by the community, and a lot of those areas of dissatisfaction haven't been addressed adequately at this stage.
So suppose Providence were to favour you and you found yourself in a leadership position in the council. What would be some practical steps that you would take to rebuild the Snowy Monaro?
Well, I think it's a difficult issue to try and deal with because there's no simple fix. I think the first thing is to ask ourselves the question, we were the result of amalgamation of 3 councils. There was an inbuilt problem right from the start because people were told we're not going to lose any staff for 2 years. So here we've got a situation where a new structure has been created, but you can't sack anyone. So the first thing is to say, do we have the right staff to carry out the core functions? And I really think that's part of the issue, is to look at what are the core services the council should be providing, and what are the services we shouldn't even enter? What are the things we shouldn't be involved in? So I think that's the first thing to work out. What are those services? Then, do we have the staff and the structure to deliver those services? And I think at the moment, for instance, in relation to roads, we've got something like 30 positions that haven't been filled. So, whether there's, we're not paying enough money or whatever the story is, but so do we have the right structure to actually deliver the services that we're required to do? And what are those essential services? Because I think what we have to do is to make some hard decisions because we can't do everything. People come to us with this and that. There was a lovely young woman lovely young girl from Bombala who contacted the councillor saying, we've got a centre for youth and we need help with our rent and this is going to cost, 10 or 12 or 15,000 a year. And it's a really worthy project. But is it the core of what council should be doing? And so there are many, many things that people want us to do. But when you look at the surveys, they tell us really it's about making sure the roads are dealt with appropriately and the rubbish is collected and that their rates don't go up. So we have to actually, cut the cloth to fit what people say as being important. So to do that, it needs a CEO that's prepared to come in and look at where we are, because I think what we've inherited is a legacy of a number of staff from a number of different areas, and no one's sort of stood back and said, is this the right structure? And do we have the right story here? Because I think ultimately to make this successful, if we have to have an amalgamated council, and de-amalgamation is going to be politically almost impossible, if we have to have an amalgamated structure, then you have to have what are the core services and we need to make that a small group that's looking after the core services. And then how do we then get different services farmed out around the region in the most efficient way possible? So I think it is a really big issue to try and get I suppose, the core mission of the council clear, what we're doing, what we're not doing, then how we distribute the staff and have the staff that meet that, and whether we're doing that, and how to do that within the financial constraints we have, and then to actually look at performance measures so that we can actually see that we're achieving those outcomes. In terms of the councillors, it's a much more difficult job because, of course, democracy delivers different people into the system. And so we've got 11 people, all of whom have different ideas. And one of the problems at the moment is that the job of the chair or the mayor is somehow to bring that group together. To date, that hasn't happened. And you can see the outcome is not delivering good outcomes for people in the region.
If you could tell every ratepayer one simple truth about what's happening inside the council, what would it be?
I don't think there is a simple truth. I think the truth that's been significant for me is something that I mentioned earlier on in the interview, and that is that many of the people in the council, amongst the council staff, are self-protective. It's quite evident. And the senior staff in the council often see their role as protecting the council. That obviously sets up a problem because the councillors their responsiveness is, in fact, their requirements under the Act is to be responsive and to deliver outcomes for residents and to make sure the council acts honestly, efficiently and appropriately. So there's a divide, I think, in that situation where there's an organisation that has a sense of protecting itself and there are councillors that want to deliver for residents, and then there's a conflict that can come into that situation. So I think that that's important for people to understand, because it's important for people to understand that they need to elect people to council who are going to be advocates and responsive to them. And my experience across a vast number of organisations is the fact that if you've got a problem in an organisation, you can't just keep on putting the same people in because you'll get the same outcomes. So I think it's very important for people to understand they need to take council elections very seriously. Just by default, people need to vote people out that haven't delivered what they said they were going to do. And that went for many of the previous councillors. And so, taking more interest in local council issues is important as well.
And finally, what would give you the most hope that real change is possible?
Well, change is very difficult, I think, in in every organisation that I've seen. And yet, I think there is a real willingness. I believe that probably all the councillors are there probably with good intentions. They want to see better outcomes for our community. There's just a different way of looking at the world. So I think in that way, that's a real positive. I think that when there's a division like there is at the moment, it's very hard to get any real change. And so I'm not hopeful that there will be any real change in the council, because the way that things are run at the moment, where 90% of the time there are 6 people that vote one way, and it's usually against increased transparency and accountability. That's a very big issue. At the same time, I reckon Augustine is right, the great man of the 4th century. Truth is like a lion, set it free and it'll defend itself. So truth becoming known by itself will engage people, cause people to actually contact councillors saying, we want this, we want that, we want more information about this, we want more accountability. And so I'm hopeful from that point of view that with pressure coming on, there will be some benefits. But the political process is really difficult. And I think it was Winston Churchill said that basically democracy has got nothing going for it except there's nothing else. Any other system is going to be worse. So we just have to deal with some of the difficulties around that. And I think that, council is finding its feet. There's been some real hiccups and difficulties. I think we can press on for the benefit of the community. I think the worst outcome is for an administrator to step in, because then there's no accountability except to the state government overlords. And so I think as difficult as it is, and with all the problems we have, we're still better with a council that's dysfunctional as it is at the moment, but have to come together. And most things like this, in my experience, will make their way in time. I wrote to the minister last December and said, there's a story of most groups when there's a period of storming and then norming and then performing. I think our storming period has been a bit longer than we'd like, but I think there's a way of making our way through to the other end. But the problem is when you've got political interference and, there's, Liberal National Party people saying the sky's falling in and this Andrew Thaler's causing this and the Biddist has been lobbied and all these things. It's not that issue. The issues are much more serious than just the behaviour of one councillor. And so I think that we have to try and work out how to keep on going and addressing issues of concern for the community. And, in time, I think we'll find our feet, but it is difficult and we just have to press on.
Professor, I thank you for your time. Before I let you go, there have been some community questions that have come in that would be framed under the conspiratorial side of things. If you just could give a brief opinion on each of these, that'd be appreciated. Is it true that councillors were informed when reviewing CEO applications that they were told not to do any research into the CEO applicants?
No, I think it's probably been a misconception. I'll tell you the way this has happened, and I think it's probably a misunderstanding, because I've been involved in a lot of CEO appointments at different levels, and I suppose what you've got normally is a process where people apply confidentially for a role. Those people want to make sure that there's none of that confidentiality is breached, and so that not everyone in the world knows that they've applied for a role and then haven't been successful. So I can see you need to guard that information very carefully. Of course, people can do their own research because the internet's very wide and it contains a lot of information, and people put a lot of about themselves on the internet. So it's quite fair game. I think the issue was not that you shouldn't do your own research, but I suppose the the group controlling this wanted to make sure there weren't people ringing up this person and that person, and just, it could really cause a big problem for the process. So I think that's been a misunderstanding.
The second one would be the rural land use strategy. Was there really a motion in previous sessions to increase the minimum entitlement sizes before you could build a home?
I think that's something that's been really concerning me, but I've been assured by council staff that this is no longer being advocated, and the existing land use strategies, which are different in the three previous zones, the Snowy, the Monaro and the Bombala Shires, will remain as they are. I think there was a wrong idea, which probably came with pressure from the state government, that now because we're one big area, we all need to be the same. Well, that was a ridiculous argument. And I think, fortunately, many residents and ratepayers expressed their strong opposition to that process, and so it's been shelved. But I think it's something we have to keep our eye on, because it would, to change that rural energy strategy would change everything for many people, and would cause potential financial disaster for many people in this area. So we need to keep on top of that, because there are those still that will want to see everything amalgamated under one sort of roof and everyone be the same. But actually, you can see Bombala is very, very different to Jindabyne, which is different to, Berridale or Adaminaby or Cooma. So I think it's been good that nothing happened, but it is lurking in the background, and people need to really keep their eyes out on it for it.
A $30 million civic centre, was this a real thing?
Look, it's before my time, but there was a view, as far as I can see, trying to track it down and making some investigations, where some councillors thought that there needed to be perhaps a $50 million centre for the council, and it was on the basis that the current council chambers had a range of defects that made it dangerous for council staff to work in. Now, I think that was always a furphy. It turned out there were a number of different work health and safety issues that were identified, and that were remedied, but it didn't need a new building. So I think, by default, many people would like to see a Taj Mahal council centre. I'm not one of those people.
There are rumours that if you ask too many questions, that you may be put on a blacklisted list known as the UCC, or Unreasonable Complainant Conduct. Is that true?
I've had that brought to my attention by a number of people. I think it is true, and I think it's been the wrong use of UCC. Now, I tried to bring that forward in one of the early meetings, because I felt it was so egregious that policy was being implemented that hadn't been reviewed and wasn't compliant with the Ombudsman's 2022 policy, which turns the story around so that rather than the council staff being the ones that are given priority, the people that are making complaints have to be given due process and have to be considered separately and have to be given the opportunity to redress. Now, the people that have approached me that have had UCCs have clearly not had proper process. It hasn't been reviewed appropriately, in that the person that applied the UCC has been the reviewer when it should be a completely independent process. And I don't think we've got the proper register and processes to actually do those UCCs and carry them out appropriately. So that was one of the reasons I brought that motion forward. It was defeated comprehensively, and I was staggered at that defeat, because it was just good governance that we made sure that our own processes and procedures were compliant with the requirements under the Office of Local Government and the Ombudsman. So I think that is a big issue. I can see that there are people that cause staff problems in terms of, making a range of requests, but that's the nature of being responsive to the community, and I think there are a range of different ways of dealing with it. The UCC should be really just a last step, and has to be taken after appropriate consultation. As far as I can see, that hasn't been done with a number of the people that have contacted me.
And that's incredibly chilling, that one, actually, that if you don't like a certain line of inquiry, that you can completely shut down a ratepayer or a resident.
I think it's really dangerous, and I think you can see why it happens, because there are people that can take up exceptional amounts of time for staff. But I think it's pretty serious when you get a UCC against you, because you're put into another box. None of your material comes forward to the council. Things are intercepted. You can't raise any issues further. And in the cases that I know about, there hasn't been an appropriate review. It's meant to be reviewed after 6 months. There has to be consultation before it's implemented. None of those steps have been done. I felt it was so bad. That was why I brought that specific issue to the council, and I was just staggered to find that people voted against it. And that's where I said, you're voting against our governance responsibilities. But it seemed to me that a number of the councillors just didn't care. And I suppose that many of the councillors see their role is just supporting what the council is doing. And what I support is making council accountable. And obviously we need to be fair about it, but we just can't be thinking, well, we'll support whatever the council staff says, because, council staff clearly can do things that are wrong and make bad decisions.
I really appreciate your time. Just two more quick questions. In a community development plan, I heard that it was more preoccupied with
in the current business papers that the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are taken out of the plan. So I think that's a good outcome, and it shows me that council staff are responsive to feedback from ratepayers and residents. But Chris, as you know, one of the problems in that whole plan was the fact that there's only a few hundred people that contributed the ideas that led to the plan, and that's out of 22,000 people. So there's a problem. I think council staff are doing their best to try and, look and liaise with residents. But, we need to do a lot better than that, because, if you just have a few hundred out of 22,000, it's very hard. It wouldn't be bad if there was a statistical way of sampling those 200 to provide effective views. But I think that was the heart of the problem with this community strategic plan. And clearly, there's no way of making a plan that goes up to 2042. The Act only requires that it be for at least 10 years, and it has to be reviewed when a new council comes in. So it's being reviewed now. There's been a lot of excellent feedback. You can see it all in the council papers. I've read through it all, and I appreciate the feedback that's there. And I think what's going to happen next is that a lot of the plans, the operational plan and so forth, that's going to be discussed on Thursday, will be out for consultation over the next month. And it's very important for people to look at the material and provide feedback. The difficulty is it's so extensive, it feels like it's too hard to know where to start. So, one of the things I'd like to see, and it's going to be hard to achieve, is just simplification of this whole process. It's hard because the state government requires a range of things, and the whole idea to me at the end of it is to leave us all so confused that we don't know what anything is, and we end up ticking off in the plan and letting it go forward. So it's a bad system and a bad process, and part of it has been required by the state government under this whole sort of planning agenda. It's remarkable, given the fact that Stalin was the first one that thought of 5 years plans, and they were an inevitable failure. Every plan was a disaster. It's amazing that we're still using a 5-year planning process and even trying to do this story, because I think it needs a complete rethink. And to me, we need to simplify, and it needs to be really a simple story. What are the top 5 issues that we need to deal with over the next year or so of the council, with a thought to what might be longer term, might be shorter term, but we need a simpler way of knowing what are the priorities, and then the staff also know what those priorities are. If you looked at those plans, you couldn't possibly work out what the priorities are. There's just page after page. It's just impossible to know. So we need to simplify somehow, but that's difficult to do.
Now, thank you once again for your patience. This is the final question. It's gonna be controversial, but you are a scientist, you're a veterinarian, you're literally a professor. This fluoride issue, it's a hot topic in the region right now. It's a hot topic in the USA. Is fluoride an issue in our region? And let me just tack that on. Is it true that for a period of time, Bombala was overdosing its citizenry with fluoride?
The last one I don't know about, but yes, fluoride is an issue. And Chris, it's very important for people to understand the history in this whole story. If we go back 50 years ago, there was a common belief in the community that the scientists knew best. So if a group of scientists said, we need fluoride in the issue, the scientists have said it, therefore it must be true. In fact, Councillor Davis said, I think one of the meetings, New South Wales Health, they've got this, so it must be right. I think increasingly, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s appointment to Health and Human Services in the US is an indication that there's a very widespread view out there that the bureaucracy, the health bureaucracy, is not trustworthy, and that decisions made about things like vaccination, things like fluoride administration, are very dodgy, and that they never had any real scientific evaluation. In fact, the fingers were on the scales. Now, there is no doubt in the case of fluoride, because I've done a lot of research myself, and there's been a very big study published in the UK just this year, which I brought up at the council meeting. There's actually no data to show the effectiveness of fluoride in prevention of decay to any level that you can measure that's significant, but there's potential for a lot of harm. And you can understand that if you've got a fluoride dosing process, there's potential for it to go awry. If you're putting external fluoride into the water, it's not hard for that process to go wrong and to be either underdosing or overdosing, depending what the situation is. So what's happened across the US in many, many states, that there's been a revolt against fluoride administration because people have realized that there's potential issues. And Tom outlined those issues very well and spoke to them at the council meeting. Somehow, many of the councillors just didn't care. Or I think they falsely believed if New South Wales Health said it, then it's okay. But I've found, my own experience, that the health authorities are often well behind the eight ball. And the eight ball has moved on a long way in this issue. And a lot of communities in the US have decided, no, we're not going to allow fluoride because there's problems in the newborn, in the unborn, in children, in their neurological development. We've got to be very careful when we're actually giving a chemical to people, and it's required whether you want it or not. So some councillors made the extraordinary argument in the meeting, oh, well, you can buy equipment to take the fluoride out. Now, you've got to spend thousands of dollars of your own money to take something out that you shouldn't be having in the first place. So, of course, it's a concern. And, of course, we shouldn't be administering fluoride in our water supply. There are too many dangers. There are too many problems potentially with it. And it doesn't matter what health authorities say, because we know health authorities have got it wrong in many, many of the cases. And it's certainly they got it wrong, particularly with many of the COVID vaccines, which have been shown, even in recent studies, to be quite dangerous and to have impacted people's health. So we can't just go along with what authorities say and say, oh, well, this is okay. We have to look at these issues and look at what the data says and look at some of the recent studies. And I suppose the UK studies, which is the biggest one ever carried out with fluoride, showed that the cost benefit was negative. There was great cost, very little benefit, if any, and potential for damage from fluoride. Now that data should inform us, and we shouldn't just wait to say, oh, wait a minute, New South Wales Health says in this thing in 2004, or the NH and MRC said this. The latest data shows the risk isn't a benefit and there's great cost. And, many of the towns and cities in the US are voting to come away from fluoride. So, those are issues that we should listen to people like Tom, who came before us, I thought did a very good job of raising the issue. So, yes, we have to be concerned. And yes, we should make people aware and give them a say in whether they want it. If the people in Bombala with this new plant want to vote to put fluoride in the water, and they think it's the greatest thing, I suppose that's the outcome of democracy. So but we have to at least give people the option that way.
Thank you very much for your time, Professor.
Thanks, Chris, for having me come and speak on the Monaro Zone.
Call them out, demand the truth, dispel the doubt, for governance must serve the land, not crush its people with sleight of hand. The worst of crisis left to fester, no justice found, no old redress here. Shame on the gang who turned their back